It was the first modern war the USA fought on foreign land. Thanks to the outcome, we've got New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Texas, Utah, and California as our states. It all started when the US was exercising manifest destiny and decided to annex or take over a large part of Mexican land. The war was started and the US had the upper hand, taking over Mexican land with almost no resistance at all. U.S. troops even invaded Mexico City via the Gulf of Mexico. Texas even became independent for a while. In the end, the Americans won, taking 1/3 of the Mexican-owned land at the time. There was more than just land in the new Mexican land, of course. Gold was discovered in California a couple days later. Anyways, what's to follow is a more in-depth story of the aftermath. We present the impact of the Mexican-American War.
It's one of the first modern wars that the United States fought. It's a war where we first started using artillery to a very large degree. It was a mobile war. They had to move very fast. And it gives an example of the United States having to move soldiers over very long distances very quickly. For example, we made our first amphibious assault during the Mexican-American War, where U.S. sailors, soldiers, and Marines landed in Veracruz to attack the Mexicans from behind their lines. Manifest destiny. Well, manifest destiny is the idea that somehow we were predestined, or God had ordained that we were to go across the country, that we were to spread from coast to coast, from the East Coast to the West Coast. So I suppose manifest destiny in 2015 doesn't mean the same thing that it meant to them in the 1830s and 40s and 50s. However, I guess we could look at it that maybe as Americans, that it is our duty and our right to maybe go off into space and colonize space. So that would be the only way I would. Yes, actually, in some ways it does. The Mexican-American War was really due in large part to Texas, and the fact that Texas had been an independent country for a short period of time, about a dozen years, and that Mexico never was willing to accept the fact that they were independent. And because of this, Mexico was pretty bitter about this. And then when the United States annexed Texas, there was a dispute between the United States and Texas over the boundary. The Mexicans were upset originally because so many Americans were moving into Texas that they felt like they were being overrun by these crazy Americans who were coming in and taking their land and weren't living by Mexican customs and speaking English and doing all kinds of horrible things like that. So in a way, it has a little to do with immigration in kind of a reverse sort of way from the way we would think of it today, but mostly either one, huh? That's a tough one, because in the one hand, it had even though it was a very divisive war, there were a lot of people who were opposed to the war, including Abraham Lincoln. At first, it really kind of united the country when we won and we got all of this land. It definitely was not a good thing for the Mexican people, because Mexico lost half of its territory, and it leads to more years of chaos for them. But I suppose for us, it just meant more land and a chance to live out that idea of manifest destiny. So, is there ever really a just war? Is there ever really a reason to fight a war? There are a lot of reasons why the Mexican War maybe isn't a just war. I mean, the fact that it's very probable that we provoked the war intentionally with Mexico. we so overpowered the Mexican forces with our technology and stuff that it wasn't really a fair fight from the beginning. Mexico was in chaos. And I don't know that the war necessarily lived up to what American ideals at the time were. Well, for the most part, people in America, especially in the 1840s and 50s, saw Mexicans as being less than whites. Not as low racially as Native Americans or maybe even African Americans, but definitely lower on the ranking of civilization than they are. So I think that because we won so heavily against the Mexicans, that I think even today we kind of, in the back of our minds as Americans, think that, oh, they just aren't as good as we are because, if you think about it, they just kind of fell apart there in the Mexican Wars. I don't know. It's a very interesting period in American history. It's the forerunner to the Civil War. All the great generals or just about all the great generals in the Civil War, it was their first experience in combat. Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, Jeb Stuart, many of the biggest names in the Civil War. That's where they, fought. I don't know, the way they used cavalry and artillery and things like that. But I don't know. I have very mixed feelings on the Mexican-American War. On the one hand, I feel really sorry for the Mexicans because, I think that it's not something they necessarily wanted, but something they kind of got pushed into. And, and the other hand, many Americans were opposed to the war very, very strongly, and yet we went into this war. It worked out in our favor, obviously, in the end, because, but I don't know. I leave that up to you guys to figure that out, whether it's, what you think.